Today, we are diving into a really fascinating Australian court case that asks a pretty shocking question. How does someone who put in 70% of the money for a house end up being awarded less than half of everything when the relationship ends? It's a wild story with some huge lessons about money, relationships, and the law.
Okay, so let's get right to the mystery at the heart of this thing. The very first court ruling in this case, Grunseth and Whiten, came up with a verdict that, when you look at it on paper, seems to defy all logic.
So get this. By the time the couple split up, the court figured out that Miss Grunseth had actually contributed about 55% of their total combined assets. But despite that, the judge only awarded her 47.5%. This means her ex-partner actually walked away with the majority share. You really don't need a calculator to see that something here just doesn't add up at all.
Right? How on earth is that possible? It just feels completely backwards. And that's the exact question Ms. Grunseth's lawyers took to a higher court. So, to understand the answer, we've got to rewind and see how this all started, and more importantly, how this seemingly impossible decision was finally overturned.
So, our story kicks off back in late 2013. Miss Grunseth and Mr. Wheaton started their de facto relationship. And they didn't just move in together, nope, they made a massive joint investment right away. They bought a house.
Now, when they bought their home for just over $1 million, the money they each put in wasn't even close. Miss Grunseth put in over $716,000 from the sale of her old house. That's more than double Mr. Witten's $320,000.
And to make it all fair and square, and to reflect this reality, they did something really smart. They registered the official property title to show a 70% ownership for her and 30% for him. So from day one, their agreement was right there in black and white.
But, life is rarely that simple, right? Their finances didn't stay clean for long. Soon, things started to get messy as new money, verbal promises, and even a new pet entered the picture.
Now, it's really important legally that this was a very short relationship. We're talking less than 3 years. But in that short time, two huge financial things happened. First, Mr. Whiten got a big inheritance, over $878,000. And a little later, he transferred $160,000 of it to Miss Grunseth. And that one payment, it would become the bombshell at the center of this whole thing.
So what was that $160,000 for? Well, depending on who you ask, you get two totally different stories. He said it was for a verbal deal to make them 50-50 owners. She said, yeah, I got the money to increase his share, but she was adamant they never, ever agreed to an equal split. And here's the kicker. That official 70-30 title deed, it never got changed.
And this wasn't just about the big money stuff. The legal fight got so personal that it even boiled down to who would get to keep their beloved dog Roxy. It just goes to show you how every single part of their shared life was tangled up in this dispute.
So, faced with that baffling 47.5% award, Miss Grunseth appealed. Her argument was pretty simple. The first judge had made a huge mistake in his logic, a mistake so big it just had to be fixed.
And you know what? The appeal court completely agreed. They looked at the numbers, they looked at the judge's conclusion, and they said in their official judgment that it was, and I'm quoting here, impossible to reconcile the finding with the facts. The math just didn't work, period.
The appeal court pointed to this fascinating legal idea called the fatal leap. This is what happens when a judge's final conclusion is just so disconnected from the evidence, so far out there, that their entire thought process is considered broken and, well, defective.
So where exactly was this fatal leap? Let's break it down. First off, the judge counted Mr. Whiten's entire inheritance as part of the couple's shared pot, even though most of that money never even touched their joint accounts. Second, he just ignored the basic math, which showed that Ms. Grunseth's initial money alone was more than half of everything they had together. And that led him to leap to a conclusion that just couldn't be backed up by the very facts he was supposed to be considering.
And what about Roxy the dog? Well, the appeal court's view was blunt. In the eyes of the law, pets are property. That means ownership isn't decided by who loves them more or who they cuddle with at night. It's decided by cold, hard evidence, like receipts and registration papers.
So, with that first wacky decision thrown out, the appeal court stepped in to set things right. They redecided the case based on the actual facts in the law, and finally, a bit of justice was restored.
The final orders were just logical and clear. The property had to be sold, and the money? It was split based on that original 70-30 agreement. To fix the issue of that undocumented payment, the court simply said,
Okay, we'll give the $160,000 back to Mr. Whitman, but it'll come out of Miss Gruntz's 70% share. And Roxy? The court followed the paper trail and awarded her to Miss Gruntzett, her documented legal owner.
This whole thing is a brilliant example of a key legal idea called the liquidator principle. See, in long relationships, the court often treats a couple's finances like one big melted pot. But in short ones, like this one, the court acts more like a liquidator. They basically unravel everything to carefully trace who put what in at the very beginning to make sure everyone gets a fair deal.
So, what can we all learn from this crazy case? First and foremost, verbal agreements about money are just a recipe for disaster. You have to get it in writing. Second, especially in shorter relationships, how you set up your finances from day one is absolutely crucial. Third, and this is a tough one for pet lovers, the law sees your pet as property, so whoever has the paperwork is the legal owner. And finally, your credibility in court is everything. A judge is looking at the whole picture.
When you think about it, this whole ordeal, all the time, the money, the stress, it all came down to one undocumented payment and a failure to update a written agreement. It really leaves us with a very important question to ask ourselves. When it comes to your most valuable assets, are they truly protected in writing?